Today, we're going to talk about one of the most, well, haunting psychological dances that can happen in relationships, projective identification, especially when we're talking about borderline personality disorder. It's a dynamic that can feel totally invisible, but trust me, it's powerful enough to completely rewrite the reality between two people. Okay, let's dive in. You know that feeling? You're in a conversation and all of a sudden you feel this crushing weight of blame for things you never even did. You find yourself apologizing for stuff you didn't mean, and before you know it, you're just drowning in emotions that don't even feel like they're yours. If any of that sounds familiar, you've probably been on the receiving end of this exact process. So, what is actually happening in those moments? Let's just strip away all the clinical jargon for a minute and get right to the heart of what projective identification really is. At its absolute core, it's an unconscious defense mechanism. So someone is struggling with these massive, overwhelming feelings. We're talking intense fear, shame, or anger. And without even realizing it, they kind of hand those feelings over to someone else. And the wild part is, the person on the receiving end then starts to internalize and even act on those very emotions. This right here, this captures the silent, desperate plea behind the whole thing. It's not a conscious thought. It's more like an unconscious psychic handoff. The pain is just too much to bear alone, so the mind finds this way to share the burden, even if it creates total chaos. And this is a really crucial point. This is not some calculated act of manipulation. For someone with BPD, this is often triggered by this overwhelming primal fear of abandonment. It's a desperate, last-ditch effort by the psyche to push out an agony that feels like it could just destroy them from the inside. It's a survival tactic, plain and simple. To really, truly understand why this happens, we have to look back. We have to go back to where it all starts, which is almost always in childhood. This is where the whole pattern gets wired into the system. Just imagine growing up in a home where your emotions weren't safe, where love was unpredictable, and comfort could just vanish in an instant. You'd quickly learn a really powerful subconscious lesson. My real feelings are dangerous. If I show them, I might lose love. So what do? You learn to bury them, to swallow them down, until they become this unbearable weight inside of you.
So, how does this childhood wound actually play out in an adult relationship? Let's look at a pretty common scenario to see this invisible dance in action.
So let's meet Amber and Michael. Amber has this intense, deep-seated fear of abandonment. One day, Michael seems a little distant. I mean, maybe he's just tired from work, but for Amber, her internal alarm bells start blaring. Her mind is screaming, he's going to leave me. That fear is just too painful to hold, so unconsciously she projects it. She accuses him of being cold, of not caring. And what happens next? Michael, feeling totally blindsided and unfairly attacked, he starts to feel defensive, guilty, and then he actually becomes distant. And just like that, her inner fear has created his outer reality. Now, here's where it gets really paradoxical. The person projecting isn't actually trying to push you away. In this kind of tragic twist, they're actually trying to pull you closer. This is the hidden motive. The feeling of being completely alone in that pain is so unbearable, so terrifying, that creating a shared emotional storm feels better than suffering in silence. In that chaotic moment, even a painful connection is better than no connection at all. It's a desperate way of trying to say, see, this is what it feels like inside me. So how do you break a cycle that's so deeply unconscious? Well, it all begins with a single moment of awareness. It starts with pausing, right in the middle of that emotional storm, and asking this one powerful question. This is the crack of light that lets you start to regain control. Okay, so recognizing the pattern is step one. Huge step. Now, let's break down the concrete, actionable things that both people caught in this dance can actually do. So if you're the one projecting, the work is really about turning inward. First, you have to recognize when you're having an emotional flashback. Then, name the feeling. Just saying, I feel scared, instead of, you are abandoning me, completely shifts your brain out of attack mode. From there, you can own the feeling by asking for what you truly need, and use grounding techniques to pull yourself back to right here, right now. Okay, and if you're on the receiving end, your job is to not absorb the storm. Trying to argue with logic here is like trying to reason with a hurricane. It's just not going to work. Instead, you need to create space. Step back, take a breath, and validate the emotion without agreeing with the accusation. Something as simple as, I can see her in a lot of pain right now, can de-escalate everything without you having to take on feelings that aren't yours. Now, stopping the cycle in the moment is absolutely crucial, but long-term healing, that requires going deeper. It means addressing the original wound that causes the projection in the first place. And this is where therapy can be a total game changer. Modalities like DBT are brilliant for teaching emotional regulation skills. Schema therapy helps you identify those deep-rooted childhood patterns, and inner child work, well, that allows you to give that wounded part of yourself the safety and compassion it never, ever received. So, what does healing actually look like in practice? Let's go back to Amber and Michael. Now, when Amber feels that panic rising, she can name it directly. She can communicate her vulnerability instead of projecting her fear. And because she's not attacking, Michael doesn't have to defend. He can simply offer reassurance. See the difference? This is the shift from chaos to real connection. Ultimately, projective identification turns another person into a mirror for our deepest, most painful emotions. And the path to healing, it isn't about shattering that mirror in anger or frustration. It's about having the courage to look closely at that reflection and understand what it's trying to show us about ourselves. And that brings us to the most important point of all. The emotions we try so hard to push away are the very ones that need our compassion the most. Learning to hold them, to meet them with understanding instead of handing them off to someone else, that's where true healing begins. Because awareness of our past, our pain, and our patterns is always, always the very first act of love.